They're worth an estimated $13 billion, their wealth tucked into Mayfair townhouses, Manhattan penthouses, and offshore trusts hidden behind shell companies. For decades, the Sackler family were celebrated as enlightened philanthropists, their name engraved in marble at the Met, Oxford. The Louvre, a dynasty that seemed to stand for healing, knowledge, and high culture. But behind the gala dinners and museum plaques was something far more dangerous, a single pill that hooked an entire nation. Today, they would be known as the family that drugged America, reshaping small towns, hollowing families, and helping ignite an epidemic that has claimed more than 500,000 lives.
On an average day like today, pharmacies across America will dispense more than 650,000 opioid prescriptions.
No one ever told us that there was an addictive quality at all.
People were suffering under opioid addictions that sometimes ended in death.
This is the hidden arc of the Sacklers, how a promise to end suffering became one of the most profitable and most devastating drug empires in modern history. Would you have guessed that the same name carved into a museum wing was also stamped on the bottle that started America's deadliest addiction crisis? Before the Sackler name adorned museum wings. It belonged to three brothers, Arthur, Mortimer, and Raymond, American-born sons of Jewish immigrants from Galicia who arrived with little more than their medical ambitions. They grew up in Depression-era Brooklyn cramped tenements, breadline rations, and the hum of prejudice that reminded them every success would have to be twice earned. That outsider grit shaped both their breakthroughs and their blind spots. By the 1940s, the eldest, Arthur, was working at Creedmoor State Hospital in Queens, then one of the world's largest psychiatric institutions. The place was overcrowded and bleak tuberculosis spread through wards. Patients were restrained for electroshock therapy or even lobotomies. Arthur often saw them plead not to be strapped down. For him, medicine had to find something more humane than a surgical pick driven into the brain. When new tranquilizers like chlorpromazine appeared, the brothers saw not just a pharmacological tool, but a moral alternative chemistry instead of crude surgery. They launched a small institute of psychobiology to explore how targeted drugs might replace the brutal treatments of the day. That experience planted a powerful conviction the right pill, if it reached the right hands, could redeem modern medicine. Arthur also learned that science alone wouldn't change practice. Persuasion would. In the late 1940s, he moonlighted at a Madison Avenue agency, pioneering the then radical idea of advertising prescription drugs directly to doctors. By 1950, he owned the trade paper Medical Tribune, a private media pipeline into more than 600,000 physicians' offices. In 1952, the brothers quietly bought a modest patent medicine company, Purdue Frederick, for $50,000, a sleepy regional outfit that would one day fuel one of America's most controversial pharmaceutical fortunes. Their climb out of poverty, their early crusade against what they saw as medical cruelty, and Arthur's marriage of marketing with science became the DNA of the Sackler empire, a blend of healer's zeal and salesman's instinct that would guide every decision to come. Through the 1950s and 60s, the Sacklers' formula of science plus persuasion began to pay off. Arthur, the sharpest strategist of the three brothers, realized something big selling a drug wasn't just about what was in the bottle. It was about the story you told, through his ad agency, McAdams. He became a master at winning over doctors, putting ads in medical journals that looked like real articles, hosting educational conferences at fancy resorts, and mailing out glossy brochures dressed up as research. Their first big hit came with Valium in the 1960s. At first, it was just another lab-made sedative. But Arthur's campaign turned it into the pill that promised to calm the nerves of a stressed-out modern world. By 1971, Valium was the top-selling drug in America, earning $2 billion a year and holding that spot for 14 years. To the Sacklers. It was proof that the right marketing could turn a simple chemical into a cultural must-have. This approach talked less about the risks, talked more about how the drug could make life easier became their signature move. The money from Valium also fueled a quiet expansion. The little company they had bought back in 1952, Purdue Frederick, grew under Mortimer and Raymond into a bigger pharmaceutical business focused on pain relief. By the late 1980s, after Arthur passed away, his brothers were ready for their next big product, OxyContin. Launched in 1995, it was promoted as a breakthrough painkiller strong enough for serious pain, but, supposedly, safer and less addictive because of its time-release design. The rollout followed the Valium playbook, big marketing campaigns aimed at doctors, upbeat educational pamphlets that downplayed the risk of addiction, and promises that sounded too good to question. Soon, the Sackler empire reached far beyond the US through a company called Pharma. They brought the same drugs and the same tactics to Canada, Europe, Australia, and parts of Asia, often moving into markets with weaker rules just as US regulators began asking harder questions. Even as lawsuits piled up in America, OxyContin's global sales kept bringing in more than $1 billion a year into the 2010s. At the same time, the family name appeared on the walls of world-famous museums and universities, the Louvre, the Met, Oxford, Harvard, painting a picture of wealthy, cultured philanthropists while their business arm kept selling stronger painkillers. What started as a mission to replace harsh treatments like lobotomies had, by the 1990s, become a global pain pill empire, one that would help spark an opioid crisis no one was ready for. How did a family that once dreamed of saving patients from suffering end up linked to one of the most painful public health disasters in modern history? Through the 1990s, Purdue Pharma's new pill, OxyContin, was praised as a medical breakthrough, a strong, long-lasting opioid painkiller that the company claimed carried less than a 1% risk of addiction. That number sounded reassuring, but it came from a short letter about hospitalized patients, not the millions of people who would end up taking the drug for weeks or months at home. Still, Purdue used that tiny statistic as the backbone of a massive marketing push that would change the way doctors treated pain in America. The company poured more than $200 million into ads, brochures, and flashy sales conferences in just its first 6 years. Sales reps were trained to tell doctors that if a patient craved higher doses, it wasn't addiction, it was pseudo-addiction, meaning their pain was supposedly undertreated and they needed more opioids. Purdue paid for thousands of luxury educational seminars, gave out branded gifts as casual as fishing hats and plush toys, and filled medical journals with full-page ads promoting the drug. The strategy worked. Prescriptions for OxyContin exploded from about 670,000 in 1997 to over 6 million in 2001. By the early 2000s, it was America's best-selling painkiller, generating more than $3 billion a year. Between 2008 and 2017, the Sackler family quietly took an estimated $10 billion out of the company, much of it moved to offshore trusts. But the human cost was devastating, as OxyContin spread from rural towns to city clinics. Overdose deaths tied to prescription opioids quadrupled between 1999 and 2010, when new rules finally tightened access to prescriptions. Many dependent patients turned to cheaper street heroin, fueling a second wave of the crisis by the late 2010s. The synthetic opioid fentanyl drove an even deadlier third wave altogether. More than 500,000 Americans have died from opioid overdoses since 1999, a tragedy that began, in large part, with a pill many doctors believed was safe. Purdue's influence reached into government too. Investigations later revealed a notorious revolving door, the FDA medical reviewer who signed off on OxyContin's original label in 1995, a label suggesting its slow-release formula is believed to reduce abuse, left the agency soon after to work for Purdue at triple his federal salary. That single line on the label gave the company the legal cover to market OxyContin as safer than older opioids. In 2007, Purdue and 3 of its executives pleaded guilty to misbranding OxyContin and paid $600 million in fines, one of the largest drug company settlements at the time. No member of the Sackler family was charged, and the company's sales push barely slowed down. By 2019, faced with thousands of lawsuits, Purdue filed for bankruptcy. A 2024 Supreme Court ruling struck down a proposed deal that would have shielded the Sacklers from further civil suits. A new nationwide settlement in 2025 now requires the family to pay $6.5 billion over 15 years and permanently leave the opioid business still without admitting wrongdoing or facing prison time. Meanwhile, the family's once polished philanthropic image collapsed. Protesters under the hashtag #TakeDownTheSacklers rallied at the Met, the Louvre, and other major museums. Several institutions stripped the Sackler name from their galleries. Marble walls that once honored the family now stand as reminders of a painful national crisis. The same hard-selling tactics that had once made the Sacklers look like innovators in psychiatry ultimately turned them into symbols of corporate greed, a dynasty accused of fueling a public health disaster while using charitable donations as a shield. It's a story that forced America to ask when medicine is driven by marketing, who really pays the price? By the mid-2020s, the Sackler name had become a paradox admired and condemned in equal measure. On paper, the family is still immensely rich, even after billions in legal settlements. The branches descended from Mortimer and Raymond Sackler are believed to control around $13 billion in global holdings, much of it tucked away in offshore trusts and prime real estate from New York to London's Mayfair and Paris's Left Bank. The original second-generation leaders, once fixtures at boardrooms and gala dinners, are now in their 80s and 90s, rarely seen in public and often living abroad as self-described global citizens. Their heirs have stepped into the family's philanthropic boards, keeping a lower profile but continuing to influence overseas markets through Pharma and investments far outside the U.S. opioid business. Philanthropy, once the family's proudest calling card, has become its most fragile asset. For decades, the Sackler name gleamed above galleries at the Met, Oxford University, the Louvre. But starting in 2019, protests and lawsuits spurred one institution after another to reject new donations or strip the Sackler name off the walls. What was meant to symbolize healing and culture now strikes many as a memorial to the opioid crisis. In the US, their business footprint looks very different. Purdue Pharma, the company that launched OxyContin, was taken out of Sackler hands under the 2025 settlement and is being refashioned as Pharma, a public benefit company whose profits must fund addiction treatment and overdose reversal programs abroad. However, Pharma continues to operate legally, selling pain and cancer medicines across dozens of countries. Today, the Sackler legacy is argued in 2 stark frames. Some see a pioneering medical family that helped replace crude lobotomies with modern drugs and gave millions to art and education. Others see the architects of a public health disaster whose fortune remains largely intact. The story is a reminder that a reputation like a drug label can be rewritten, but not so easily erased. For more than 70 years, the Sackler family shaped two very different stories of American medicine. One began in the crowded wards of a mid-century psychiatric hospital, where a young doctor believed chemistry could spare patients from the violence of lobotomies and shock therapy. The other unfolded decades later in boardrooms and marketing suites, where that same faith in pharmaceutical progress, amplified by aggressive salesmanship, helped ignite a public health disaster that has claimed over 500,000 lives. Their rise shows how good intentions, unchecked incentives, and powerful storytelling can combine to move entire medical systems for better and for worse. Their fall shows how reputations built on philanthropy can erode overnight when the human cost of a product becomes impossible to ignore. Today, the Sackler name is vanishing from museum wings even as it lingers in court filings, medical journals, and in the lives of families who lost loved ones. It's a reminder that wealth can purchase prestige, but not absolution. What do you think? Does philanthropy redeem a fortune built on harm, or should cultural institutions refuse the legacy altogether? If dynasties like the Sacklers continue to shape drug policy through lobbying and global affiliates, what safeguards should exist to protect public health? Share your thoughts in the comments and stay tuned for our next deep dive into another powerful family that changed the course of modern medicine.